Hello, my name is Stephanie Haddon, and today I'll be talking about classroom assessment technique number 19, otherwise known as problem recognition tasks, which is discussed in the textbook Classroom Assessment Techniques by Angelo and Cross. So, what are problem recognition tasks? Problem recognition tasks are used to identify a set of problems that can be solved most effectively by only one or a few methods that you're currently teaching in the classroom. You can ask students to identify by name which method best fits the problem without actually having them solve the problem. So, what would drive this strategy? So, typically, students are learning various different types of problem solving methods in the classroom. It's been recognized that some learners find it difficult to determine what type of problems are best solved by which problem solving methods. This classroom assessment technique is driven by learners being able to put their problem solving skills to best use by developing diagnostic skills to help match problem types with their solutions. Learners' first step to problem recognition task is to identify and categorize the problem into a problem type before actually going in and trying to resolve the actual problem. By identifying the problem type first, it helps learners resolve the problem more effectively. So, when would this strategy work best? This strategy works best when there's only one resolution method that can be used for each identified problem. Therefore, this strategy works best in quantitative and technical fields such as mathematics, physics, statistics, accounting, as learners are often using or learning about variety of specific problem solving techniques or methods in these specific settings. It can also be used for learners who are learning more general investigative problem solving approaches like critical thinking and policy analysis. In my field, for example, we use problem recognition tasks for training in almost every one of our fields. By using this strategy, we help learners recognize what correct policy aligns with a common problem situation that they may be faced with in the real world. So limitations for this strategy. So with each classroom assessment technique, there will be limitations. So the first limitation that would be important to recognize for this assessment technique is that learners may be faced with really complex and multifactored situations in the real world, and therefore it may not fit into one specific problem type category. So at my workplace, we have policy practice guides that clearly lay out which policies and best practices are used for any given situation. This works great when the situations learners are faced with are straightforward. Then we have something called one off type situations that I like to call them. And this is when there's a lot of gray area. So, thankfully, at my workplace, we have a protocol in place when learners are faced with these situations in the real world. And they would be going through our quality assurance department to ensure the best practices are being met for that specific situation. So while this procedure exists at my workplace, this may not be the case for others, and it may be difficult to decide which category best fits the situation. Secondly, it's been recognized that just because learners can appropriately identify the problem type doesn't necessarily mean that they know actually how to solve the problem. So this is something that I've actually seen quite a bit in my classroom as well. Learners have been easily able to identify the problem type. However, they get confused along the way and sometimes overthink their resolution. And their resolution actually sometimes contradicts the correct problem type that they originally had. So therefore, I think it's important to ensure that learners understand why the problem type they've selected is correct or incorrect to ensure that there'll be a correct follow through. So advantages of this strategy. So one advantage for this strategy is that it's a very fast and simple way to assess learners' analytical skills. It focuses students' attention on correctly recognizing and diagnosing problems rather than immediately again trying to go in and resolve them. I believe that this is a good method as learners can often get caught up trying to figure out what's the best way to solve this problem. By breaking things down and just being able to identify the correct problem type first, it should then lead them to the only solution that's available, or in my workplace scenarios, the correct policy that's only available to then resolve that problem in a quicker, easier, more straightforward process. Also, by helping learners make connections between specific and general levels of problem solving, this strategy shows how to apply problem solving skills in learning to different and unfamiliar circumstances that they're being faced with. It also helps learners think more generally rather than as individual or individual isolated problems. This strategy also allows students to think more deeply and recognize the problem at hand rather than just trying to memorize procedures and solutions. So, in terms of best practices, some of the best practices to consider when using this strategy in the classroom is to ensure that each problem falls into only one problem category type. Like I mentioned at my workplace, we have a quality assurance department that we work with to ensure our policies and best practices that we're providing to learners in our classrooms are accurate, up to date, correct. It would be important for you to routinely check that the scenarios that you're teaching your learners are straightforward, they're not confusing or misleading. So either checking that with a department that you may have at your workplace or possibly running that by a colleague just to ensure you're coming into the same resolution and the same problem type. It's also best to give learners some time to practice utilizing this. So when I was doing my research, I realized that for myself, because I'm a subject matter expert in my field, I can easily identify problems, problem types, and then therefore the solution. You have to realize that this is a brand new skill set that learners are learning, so it's going to take them some time to actually learn this and apply themselves in this skill. So providing feedback is obviously very important, especially with these problem recognition tasks. So by using CATs, for example, we are helping learners understand if they're getting the concepts that we are teaching them. But we're also ensuring that us as the instructor, we're able to gauge how we're presenting our learning methods and if we're being clear with our lesson planning and if we're being clear with our learning outcomes, if the learners are either understanding or not understanding what we're presenting to them. So when it comes to problem recognition tasks, this is an ability that many learners, like I mentioned, they may not have been openly taught this before, right? So we may have to again demonstrate problem recognition and provide practice in this skill before we can actually assess them in a significant way. Currently in my classroom, we present learners again with our policy guides and best practices for their job. They are then given typical situations in the learning classroom, ranging from easy to difficult, and they need to recognize the problem type at hand. And then that would lead to solving the problem, and they would use the policy guides as reference. We usually break learners into groups and do group activities for this. Once the group activity is complete, we go over the problem types with the groups and identify what has been done correctly and what has been done incorrectly. So if it's done correctly, again, I want to let them know why it's been done correctly. If it's been done incorrectly, we want to provide the learners with more information as to why it's been done incorrectly and maybe why they're having some difficulty with that to ensure that we're giving them extra support on those more difficult ones. I also try and provide more real life examples that I've personally experienced in the field. So that way learners have something else to kind of relate to, especially with the ones that are a bit more difficult, and try and create more of a connection. So these are the three resources that I've used to create this presentation here. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. So thank you for listening to the presentation, and I hope that I provided you with some useful information regarding this classroom assessment technique. Thank you so much.